Okay, so we are transitioning over live, and I'm waiting for Facebook to notify me. And as soon as it notifies me that we're live, there we go. So I'm streaming live from the Faith in the Valley main page for our staff and for Faith in the Valley San Joaquin. Janine, if you could actually on your device click onto the Faith in the Valley, the main one, I will go ahead and click on the Faith in the Valley San Joaquin one, and then I'm going to share it on my personal page as well. So before we go into the deep technical dive of everything, good morning. I wanted to welcome you all to part two, our understanding COVID-19 tenant rights. And what's interesting about this one is that I think what Janine was it in January when we were doing a lot of legwork, and you guys can go ahead and come off mute. I think we were in January when we were doing a significant amount of work in regard to a couple of bills and trying to make sure that we got those things passed so that we would have more of an extension. And so this bill is what, SB 19? Somebody tell me if I'm right.
91. SB 91.
Where I go flipping my numbers, me and my good dyslexia. So SB 91, and we're going to talk a little bit today about SB 91. So to start, my name is Toni McNeil. I am a community organizer in the San Joaquin County with Faith in the Valley. We do regional work throughout the entire Central Valley. Faith in the Valley is strong. It's a strong organization. We're getting stronger every day. And we really do help shape the narrative of what's taking place when it comes to social injustices throughout the Central Valley, San Joaquin County, Stanislaus County, Merced County, Fresno County, and Kern County. So I have some of my peers with me today, and I want to go around and let them introduce themselves. And then we have a special guest who is our expert and is going to walk us through understanding SB 91 and how that bill impacts the rights of tenants during this time that we're in with COVID. So let me kick it over to Zani, my partner in good crime. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Zani Thompson. I'm a community organizer with Faith in the Valley in San Joaquin County, working alongside the amazing Elder Tony. I'll pass it over to Dr. Janine.
Good morning, everyone. I just want to thank Elder Tony for creating this space for all of us, because I know it's been a really rough year for my family and my students and my friends and just so many of us. And there's been a lot of confusion around what passed, what are the protections? Am I safe? Am I going to lose my housing? And I just think it's just really important for us to create these spaces so that we can support each other. We can share information that we know, so people know that they're not alone. And so, yeah, I opened with that, and my introduction is, my name is Janine Nkosi. I'm very fortunate to work with an amazing group of folks at Faith in the Valley as a regional organizer. I also get to do on-the-ground organizing out of Fresno with my students and community partners to try to, pass protections and policies and different things to guarantee that everybody has a right to safe and affordable, permanently affordable homes. And then I do like policy work, research and stuff across the Central Valley. And I have been studying, if you will, the housing crisis for about 8-ish years now. And so I think today maybe we might have bring in a little bit of that. I'm not sure, but I'm thankful to be here. And I'm going to kick it over to Monica.
Great, thank you, Janine. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Tony, for having us. And welcome to everyone. My name is Monica Souza. I am an attorney with California Rural Legal Assistance, CRLA. We are a legal aid office, a statewide legal aid office. We have a number of offices statewide, and I'm based out of our local office here in Stockton. And so we provide free legal assistance to individuals in our county. Thank you.
So today what we're going to do is we're going to take a dive into SB 91. And so I'm trying really hard to use less organized ease, is what I call it, and really be able to just break down the blah, blah, blah of the language of these bills. And so sometimes when we have these changes that take place, we have to pull in experts that can really dig in and sift through it. And so I've worked with Monica for a couple of years now, and she is amazing. Amazing for sure. So we're going to look at the tenant rights. What we want to do now, SB 91, and as I was doing a little bit of just background on it and digging through it, it has a balance of protections that are in place that is set up to assist in protecting the homeowner and the tenant during COVID. It's implemented strategically to bring relief for both homeowner and tenant, and to create a bridge so that they can, work through some of the issues when it comes to falling behind on your rent. So we will be talking at another time with homeowners in regard to understanding the nuances of that, because we do, as Faith in the Valley, have homeowners in our congregations that don't want, to see their tenants homeless, and they desire to see, things put into place to protect them. And they're also concerned because this is their only livelihood. These are their properties as well. And so we want to make sure that we create space that is equitable for both voices to be heard, and for us to understand all of the ins and outs of this. So with that being said, I am going to kick it over to Monica give me a second. So I'm going to pull up and share my screen. And it's going to look rough for a second, but y'all can forgive me for that. So I'm going to pull up my screen. I'm going to share the PowerPoint presentation, Monica, that you sent. And we will get us going on that. And just share your screen, Tony, and I'll still be in the background trying really hard not to make faces. Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yay, I did it. Okay. All right. The floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tony. So I think that's a really good starting point, Tony, that you mentioned. SB 91 provides protections it's meant to provide protections for tenants, but also relief for landlords. So, and throughout the presentation, we'll talk a little bit and touch a little bit on both of those. So as I mentioned, I'm with California Rural Legal Assistance. We're the legal aid office for San Joaquin County. And we can go to perfect. So just a little bit about who we are. We're a nonprofit law firm that was founded in 1966. So we've been around for a while. We provide free legal services statewide to low-income individuals. And we have about 20 field offices statewide throughout California. Our mission is to fight for justice and individual rights alongside the most exploited communities in our society. Our Stockton office that I mentioned locally in San Joaquin County, our Stockton office provides free legal assistance to residents in a number of areas. So we do housing, eviction defense, fair housing issues, discrimination cases, providing know your rights, outreach and education. We do employment law, wage and hour, retaliation, health and safety issues, education law, discipline, suspensions, some language access issues. Then we also help with public benefits like safety net benefits, SSI, CalFresh, CalWorks, general assistance, Medi-Cal. So any benefit issues with terminations or denials. And within our Stockton office, we also have our agricultural worker program that focuses on farm workers and providing legal assistance to them. And farm workers meaning could be field workers, dairy workers, packing shed workers, so any ag workers. And they focus a lot on employment and then also on housing. So for today, we'll cover kind of a broad overview of what SB 91 protections provide. Talk a little bit about what tenants need to know and do, and what landlords' requirements are, as well as touch a little bit on fair housing issues related to that rental assistance program, and then just briefly on this small landlord mortgage relief also. So for tenants protections, so this bill protects all residential tenants, and this includes mobile home residents. So sometimes we see with mobile home residents, they are covered under sort of their separate rules, but they are covered under this bill, and regardless of immigration status or if there's a written lease. And what it provides is that if tenants are unable to pay their rent due to COVID-related financial distress, they cannot be evicted for unpaid rent during the period from March 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2021. But important to note that even though a tenant cannot be evicted during that time, it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't still owe the rent. You just cannot be evicted for it. So until June 30th, 2021, so the end of June, evictions are only allowed under limited circumstances. And so those can be, we'll go into a little bit more, but those can be, you know, for cause issues or health and safety issues. So we'll go into that. But again, if there is non-payment of rent and it's related to COVID financial distress, so I lost my job because of COVID, then as long as the tenant is doing what they need to do, which we'll go into what that means, then they should not be evicted for not being able to pay their rent for this period of time. Okay, so there's a number of different protections in place. So the state protections is SB 91, and that's, again, tenants under SB 91, another protection that is in place provides that all tenants are entitled to just cause protections until July 1st. So what that means is a landlord cannot issue a notice for no cause. So for example, a 30-day or a 60-day notice and not provide a reason. That's not permitted during this time due to the pandemic. And all the protections really are in place. The purpose is to keep people housed, right? During the pandemic, we don't want to be displacing people or, you know, people becoming homeless during this time. So no cause notices are not permitted during this time. And that's regardless of, not going to go too much into what the other bills provide, but there's some exceptions with single family homes and things like that. This says all tenants are protected. There's not exceptions here until July. For at fault, landlord must give a notice and give an opportunity to cure. So for example, if they're, oh, sorry, yes.
Forgive me, I'm not paused and the landscape people, I'm not muted and the landscape people are on my patio. So can you give me 1 second
Yes.
to mute myself? I apologize.
Oh, it's okay. Great, thank you, Tony. So we have our local state protections that we just talked about, and then there's also federal protections. And I think one of the big ones that we want to keep in mind is the CDC order. And this prohibits all fall evictions through March 31st, 2021. So with the CDC order, this is set to expire the end of this month, if not extended. And what this is, this essentially, what's really important with this is that this stops if someone falls under the criteria. So the criteria is here listed. So income loss or increased expenses due to COVID. Their household income is less than $99,000. It protects tenants from eviction for rent that accrued before March 1st, 2020. I'm sorry, that should say after. I'm not sure why that says before. It should say after March 1st. And it prohibits a landlord from taking steps to evict, including requesting a sheriff's notice. So what's really, really important here for us in California, because we have strong protections, this CDC declaration can be submitted at any time up until a lockout. So if a tenant maybe doesn't provide a declaration in the beginning when they're given a notice, or if they go to court and they lose their UD trial, and let's say the sheriff comes out to give notice of a lockout, they can still submit this declaration if they fall within this criteria. So anytime. So this is really, really important for tenants to know. And like I said, it is set to expire on the 31st, but I know that there is a lot of discussion that it may be extended. So that's important to note. And then we also have our local protections and the Stockton ordinance specifically. So this is specific for City of Stockton tenants. And so what the Stockton ordinance says is that if an affected tenant, so you have to fall under what an affected tenant is. And so that's essentially a tenant who has suffered COVID-related financial distress, can be evicted by a landlord may not terminate their tenancy if they're an affected tenant. If a tenant can demonstrate that unless the landlord can demonstrate that the termination is for cause posing an imminent threat to the health and safety of other occupants in the property. So it's another protection, and this is really important. And again, this is more only for Stockton residents. So it's not for the county, it's just a local protection, but it's something to also keep in mind because it is a strong protection.
Monica, can I ask a question here? Because there was some confusion as to whether how the state protections affected the local, either city or county protection. So I'm curious if the state orders are lifted, right? SB 91, it expires on the 31st, and we don't have something else to replace it, or it gets extended. Do the local protections that were passed at any time during the pandemic, they just automatically go back into effect?
So it depends.
Okay.
So it's very specific with the state protections that are in place of whether or not local protections will apply, and it depends on when the local protections were enacted. So Stockton's ordinance was enacted before. And then there's also specific language in the state protections. If it's related to rent, then the state protections are the ones that apply. But related to cause and like when a tenant can be evicted for cause and whatnot. What the Stockton ordinance says specifically in the ordinance, it says that it will be in effect until 90 days after the state orders have been lifted. So the state of emergency has been lifted. So I would argue that it is in effect. Or I think the other language is if it's repealed, which it has not been to my knowledge. So I think arguably they are still in effect. But I think that from, jurisdiction to jurisdiction, depending on where this ordinance is, it really depends on when the ordinance was enacted. So I'm just speaking on Stockton specifically right now.
So then just as for any folks that are listening right now, if the state level protections are expired, then the best thing for folks to do would be to contact their local legal aid organization or try to get a hold of someone within the city or county to find out what is still in place at the local level.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That with this is I would say very complicated, because there's just so many changes and there's just so many, for state protections, for federal, for local. So I think it is best if a tenant is served with a notice, or if they're not sure about something, it's always best to seek legal advice, particular to your situation, because there's just so many intricacies, right, to this, that it's difficult to say like this applies across the board, right? It really depends on, the type of notice, the type of tenancy, like there's so many factors to consider, and depending if you live in Stockton or Lodi, like there's just so many factors. So it's really important that tenants seek legal assistance and legal advice if they're served with any type of notice, so that, an attorney could look specifically at their situation to provide proper legal advice. Great, we can go to the next slide. Okay, great. So again, important to note that tenants with unpaid rent, they must take certain actions to be protected. And we'll go into that. And then landlords must also serve certain documents to comply with the law, and basically put tenants on notice of what the rights are. Tenants still owe the unpaid rent. If there is unpaid rent after August, and these are, I should say, a lot of these different protections have been extended a number of times. So as of right now, this is the date, but this could be extended. We don't know at this point. But so as of right now, if there is unpaid rent owed, collections can be filed in small claims court, but only after August 1st of 2021. With COVID rent debt, there's specifics in SB 91 that say there cannot be late fees charged. So if a tenant can't pay due to COVID, a landlord should not be adding a late fee every single month. So no late fees. COVID rent debt cannot be used as a negative factor in screening a tenant. So in the future, this should not be something that is considered. COVID-19 rent debt cannot be sold or assigned if a tenant would have qualified for rent relief. So what this means, I apologize. What this means is that if, let's say a tenant qualified for rent relief, but didn't, but let's say a landlord didn't want to accept the rent relief, for example, then this cannot be sold as rent debt until July 1st, if not until July 1st. Rent payments must be applied to current month rent. So it's important that a tenant specify. It's important that a tenant specify the current, if they're paying, let's say this month I'm paying my full rent because I no longer have COVID-related I'm not COVID-related financial distress. I'm now working, let's say, then I should specify like on my money order or my check, this is for July 2021 or whatever, or March of 2021 for the specific month. Rent payments, okay. A landlord cannot use a tenant security deposit to satisfy COVID rent debt unless the tenant agrees in writing to this. So if a tenant agrees, yes, that's fine, okay. But otherwise, a landlord cannot use their security deposit for that. And then retaliation is just in general, it's prohibited, but SB 91, it gets more stricter on this this subjects landlords to higher penalties if they do retaliate against a tenant for owing COVID-related rent. So if a tenant is impacted by COVID-19 rent, COVID-related financial distress, what they should try to do is, one, they should try to pay at least 25% of the rent each month, if they can. If they can do it each month, great. If they can't, by June 30th of 2021. So that was part of what SB 91 did, is this was set to expire the end of January, and it extended this date out to June 30th, 2021. For also, the second thing that is really, really important for tenants to do is, if they're suffering COVID-related financial distress, they should sign and return the declaration each month that they've been impacted by COVID financial distress. If a tenant cannot pay the 25% that month, so long as they submit the declaration saying that they're suffering from COVID-related financial distress, they cannot be evicted. It's really important to carefully read any documents that the landlords provide. Landlords, like I mentioned earlier, there are a number of notice requirements that need to be provided to the tenant that also explain the protections that tenants have. So it's really important, any notices you receive, that you're carefully reviewing those. And it's important to keep track of all of the rent payments, sort of like your own rent ledger. So you know how much was paid each month, what was paid, what wasn't paid. So keeping track of that is really important. This notice, so landlords were required to give notice to tenants per SB 91 by February 28th of what their rights are. And so there's a specific form that should have been issued that basically breaks down and explains to tenants that if you're suffering from COVID financial distress, these are your rights. So this is just an example of that. Notice requirements. So one thing also that SB 91 provides is that instead of a tenant just getting the typical 3-day pay or quit notice, now what is required instead is a 15-day pay or quit notice, as opposed to the 3 days. And so this provides more time for the tenant to pay or quit and or provide their declaration to the landlord if they cannot pay. Notices need to contain certain specific information, and the landlords should also include a copy of a declaration, a blank declaration, so that if the tenant is suffering from COVID financial distress, it's there and they just can complete it and return it to their landlord. Again, prohibited actions by landlords. So again, it's just in general, it's prohibited to discriminate against any tenant based on any protected class. So that includes age, race, religion, disability, source of income, immigration status, or other protected categories. They should not harass or retaliate against a tenant for missed rent. SB 91 provides for higher fines for this, from $1,000 to $2,500 for landlords who retaliate against tenants, or let's say sometimes we see illegal lockouts, trying to, for example, turning off utilities or locking someone out. There just generally have always been penalties, but these penalties are increased now due to SB 91.
I just have a quick comment, and if you could elaborate on it. I don't know when it was passed, but something was passed specifically banning property owners or landlords from asking about the immigration or like citizenship status of tenants. And we hear that people are being threatened, by being called, like ICE being called on them. And so if you could say anything that you think would be helpful for folks to know about that particular piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are protections against landlords who do those actions. Calling ICE on someone is not allowed. There is and I don't know off the top of my head, I can't think of it right now, what this was passed a couple, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, specific legislation on that. There are penalties associated with that, private actions that can be taken. So there's a whole host of things. And also potentially, I would say too, just on top of that, like related to language, like access and national origin discrimination too. So yeah, there's a whole host of protections for tenants in that area. So we could do like a whole presentation on that, because there's a lot on that. But yes, there are protections. Landlords should not do that. And there are private rights of action where a tenant can file, like affirmative. It provides for that as well. Thank you, Jenny. So other, again, it's illegal to discriminate, and it's any protected class. So again, race, disability. So sometimes we see tenants who ask for reasonable accommodation request, and a landlord, let's say for a service animal or an emotional support animal, and a landlord just says no and doesn't engage in the interactive process. That can be discrimination. Marital status, national origin, color, ancestry, religion, familial status, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression. So this is not an exhaustive list. But any protected class, source of income, we see this, and this also was recently with SB 329, that also moved to include source of income to include Section 8 tenants. So, a landlord can't say, oh, you have a Section 8 voucher, I'm not renting to you. That's discrimination. So that's prohibited. Examples of discrimination could be refusing to rent to someone because of one of those protected classes, refusing to sell or negotiate, denying a dwelling, setting different terms or conditions or privileges, providing different services or facilities. So essentially treating someone differently because they're a member of that protected class, that's discrimination. And with fair housing, there are tenants can file complaints if they feel that they've been discriminated against with either the Department of Fair Employment and Housing or DFEH or HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development. And there is generally a 1-year statute. So 1 year to do this. So from the date that you have been discriminated against. So it's really important that if you're discriminated against, that you seek legal assistance, or if you're interested in filing a complaint, that you do so timely. With the rental, so SB 91, another part of that is providing rental assistance. And so for rent relief, there's actually a number of different ways a tenant can apply for rent relief. I should say landlord or tenant can apply for rent relief. So these programs, the state ordered that the applications be open March 15th. So applications should all be open at this point. And these are for households with income of less than 80% of the area median income, the AMI. And priority is given to tenants who have income below 50% of the AMI, the area median income. And this is for tenants who have suffered financial hardship due to COVID. So I lost my job, or reduction in hours, reduction in salary, or so if there's some type of reduction and it was due to COVID, that should apply.
Could you, sorry, I always get this as a question from folks on area, AMI. What does that mean? How can I figure out if my income falls within that kind of the window? Can you maybe break that down a little bit more? What does that mean, and how can folks find out?
Yeah, so the area median income is really going to depend on the area you live in, right? So the city. To find that, I want to say I can maybe send it out after. I don't know off the top of my head the link on that, but you can get that online and find that information. But it's going to be specific to the region you're in, and it's the area median income. So it's what the median income is for that area, which is going to be different drastically depending on where you live. So, if I live in San Francisco, it may be much higher as opposed to living maybe in a more rural area, like maybe Stockton or another area. But it is going to be specific to the region. Oh, perfect. Thank you. And maybe we can, I'm not sure for the website, maybe Tony, we can share that out after or on the comments. I'm not sure how to do that. Great. Okay, perfect. So what's important to note with the rental assistance is that it's different if, well, let me start. Both landlords can apply and tenants can apply. But the amount of rent that you're eligible for, the percentage, is different if I'm a landlord or if I'm a tenant. Okay, and so payments are made directly to the landlord. Payments can also be made for utilities, so to a utility provider. So this also covers that if you're, let's say your electric bill, water bill, sewage bill, you're behind on that due to COVID as well. This can also provide assistance for that. So the payments are generally made directly to the landlord or utility provider. However, if, let's say, a landlord or utility provider refuses to accept that, they can be made directly to the eligible household. The rent arrears are given priority. So that's the purpose of the rental assistance, is to cover rent for the period of time, the arrears. And if a landlord applies, then it can cover up to 80% of the unpaid rental rent, the unpaid rent, 80% of that. If a landlord agrees to accept the funds, then they also must agree to release the remaining debt that is owed. If a landlord chooses not to participate and apply for this program, then a tenant can apply on their own, but only for 25% of the rent arrears. So I think this so if a landlord agrees to accept payments, again, through the rental assistance program, the state may be able to pay up to 80% of the unpaid rent, so long as the landlord agrees to forgive the remainder. If a landlord does not agree to accept the rental assistance payments, the state may be able to pay up to 25%. So I think this is just repeated. And so one way of applying for this is through the state. And so this is the state, so housingiskey.com, and the phone number is here. You can go directly to their website, and either a tenant or a landlord can apply. Again, if a landlord applies, it's up to 80%. So it's really important, I would say, is with both landlord and tenant applying together and working collaboratively on this is really beneficial to both, because you can get more of the rent and get landlords paid back. And for another way of applying for the assistance, locally, San Joaquin County also has an application process. If you're a resident of Stockton, then the city of Stockton has established their rental assistance program through the city, and the website is here. So you can go directly to the website and apply through there as well. For residents who are not in Stockton and live in either unincorporated parts of the county or Escalon, Lathrop, Lodi, Manteca, Ripon, Tracy, so other cities in the county, there is also a county website that a tenant can apply through and submit their application. And then the other part of SB 91 is small landlord relief. So there is also language about relief, mortgage relief for small landlords, and what they identify as a small landlord is an owner of 4 or fewer properties. And each property has to have no more than 4 rental units. Properties do not have to be owner occupied, and COVID-19 impacted means at least one tenant has not been able to pay full rent due to COVID. And with this, if a landlord has a federally backed mortgage, then they can request a forbearance pursuant to the CARES Act to help them avoid becoming delinquent on their mortgage. So it's really important if a tenant can't pay because there's COVID financial distress, that maybe a landlord is also suffering from COVID related financial distress, and the tenant, they're not getting rent, they can apply for that. If you have a non-federally backed mortgage, you can also contact your service provider to request that, and there's different options for that. But it's important to note that is something that may be available to landlords. And then there's different options. And again, this is really brief, but through forbearance, reinstatement, repayment deferrals, loan modifications, there's all sorts of things that sometimes the the landlord can apply through their mortgage holder, the bank, for different ways for them to work with them so they don't lose their property. All right. I know that was brief and there's a lot, but any questions, I'm happy to answer. And this is just our local office information and phone number. We're located in downtown Stockton. Currently our offices are working remote, but hoping to get back into the office soon. And then our phone number is here that you can reach us as well. Thank you.
I just want to thank you, Monica, for walking us through that with such clarity, because it's just so confusing right now and things are constantly changing, and all the legalese, the language, it can just be so hard to follow it all. And I just think you did such a great job of walking us through it in plain language. One follow-up. I spent almost 4 months observing an eviction court, and there were a lot of times where tenants came in to fight their case, especially when it was around like habitability issues, trying to get their landlords to make repairs, landlords being unresponsive, tenants, needing to take care of themselves and their families, and so make the repairs themselves. And so it opened up, right, like a dispute. And renters would come in with what they believed was documentation that would prove their case. But the law is very black and white, and you have to have certain kinds of documentation to argue your case. And so if you could just say, what are the essential pieces of information that people would need to have to save, take a photo of it, and you even let us know, because can they take a photo of all the paperwork and have it like electronically, just in case they lose one piece? Or if you can just say anything more about like that piece, I think that would be really helpful.
Sure. Yeah. So we also see many tenants who have habitability issues. And so it's important. So it is very complicated in the sense that the law does require that a property be habitable. And it lists certain things of what that means, right? So sometimes I hear tenants will say, well, I don't have an air conditioner. That's not necessarily something that's listed as a habitability issue, as opposed to a heater is required. So there's just very specifics under the law, right, of what it means for a property not to be habitable. So starting with that. And then if my property is uninhabitable, then there are specific requirements that need to be followed. And I think it's really important, providing notice, right, to the landlord that, for instance, my heater is not working, or, I have bed bugs, or I have roaches, or whatever the habitability issue is. You need to provide proper notice to the landlord so that they're on notice and they have an opportunity to fix the issue. And it's important that you keep documentation of all of this. So, if you do it in writing, a letter, that you keep a copy of it, because all of this is really, really important. And then it's also important to know that even though I may have a habitability issue, it doesn't mean that I pay zero in rent, because the court still sees that, you have 4 corners of a home, you have, let's say, maybe one room, there's an issue, but the rest of the home is fine. Then it doesn't mean that I can just withhold absolutely all of my rent. And I think sometimes tenants may get confused and think, well, there's a hole in my ceiling and I can't use one bedroom, so I'm not paying any of my rent. And that's not necessarily correct. So it's really important, that if you're going to withhold rent, you seek legal advice so you know what you need to do. Usually it's very risky to withhold rent. So another way, because if you withhold rent, many times landlords will serve a 3-day pay or quit notice and treat it as if it's non-payment, and that's how an eviction case can start. So sometimes too, what we can advise our clients or advise our tenants and let them know is that another way also could be, so you're not risking an eviction, you can also file a case in small claims court instead to get back the rent that you paid that maybe you shouldn't have had to pay. So those are just a couple of things, but I think that, like you mentioned, documentation is so important. Pictures are so important. Notice, just having everything together so that you're able to really show and explain that to a judge if it does go to court.
Then how about specifically during this pandemic period? What does it mean, like specifically for a COVID, like financial impact? Clearly, like losing your job or your hours being cut back is one. But what about an increase in your household bills because now your children are all home and you're having to pay more in electricity and food and different things that you need for your household? Could you say anything more about that? And then again, like what kind of documentation folks would want to be keeping?
Right. Yeah. So I think, so that's right. So if there's like loss of income, then, if I had to apply for unemployment insurance because, I lost my job, so keeping documentation of that. But also, like you said, more expenses due to COVID, right?
Schools are closed and people are having to pay for childcare and, other types of, yeah.
Exactly. So any documentation you can keep. So, receipts, anything that shows that, that documents that. And then specifically for the rental assistance program, they have specific requirements and documentation also. And that list is listed on their website that provides like what documentation is acceptable for that.
Okay. And one of the reasons why I ask this is I've done a lot of research on evictions, and there's a myth that people have, a common myth, that people are foregoing paying rent and they're just hunkering down inside of, apartments or homes. And that's just not the case. Oftentimes it's people just, are hanging on by a thread, struggling to make ends meet every month. And it's like one unexpected, a car breaking down or somebody, getting ill and, like needing to take care of your family can cause people to fall short on rent. And so right now, over this last year, certainly everybody's experiencing an unexpected life event. And household budgets are not anything but stable. And so, yeah, I was just really curious about those more like uncommon types of household budget impacts during COVID and whether or not folks would be eligible. If you're $100 short on rent because your food budget increased, is that going to be like allowable if you follow the CDC and do the submit the form and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it does provide that COVID-related expenses. So I think arguably those would be COVID-related and would. Okay. And I think that's exactly right too, is that, the myth that just because I apply for unemployment insurance that I'm going to get it tomorrow. That's an area that we work in, and we see a ton of cases where people have applied for unemployment benefits, and for one reason or another, it's still on hold. We have some cases going back to February, July of last year, so just because people apply for the benefits doesn't mean that, that's going to come, real quick either.
Monica, I really appreciate you taking this time and answering, just sharing this information. I didn't get an opportunity to, and I wanted to, I was having a little technical difficulty for anyone that had any questions. We are coming on the hour. However, if there are any questions that folks do have that are watching, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And if they can be answered, we will answer them. And so I'm just trying to make sure I'm clear in understanding the relief funds that are on a state level are accessible on a county level and a city level even. And so that's something that I was hearing you say. Is it okay to share that one slide with those links of information? On our pages so that we can ensure that folks know how to apply.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, the more we can get this out to folks so they know it's there, the better. And I would just say that for Stockton specifically, I know that on their application on their website, it says it's through April 30th. So it seems like that deadline is shorter, and the money is there until exhausted. So I would just say you should apply. Like if you need the money, you should do it sooner than later.
Okay, Kanzani, I had you come off of mute too because did you have a question? And two, I know that you're working with students here locally. And so I know that they are qualified also for these resources. How would they go about it? For me, my question, I'm sorry, Zani, how would they go about it? Say students are also, they're renting together. So they typically, are renting a room or what have you. That student housing thing can be a base. So do they go about it the same way? Is there something unique that you would say for those that are renting a room from the same house that need assistance? Monica, I don't know.
Yes, yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, so I mean, if they're a tenant, then I think that they would qualify in the same way. I think that if they're living, if like a roommate situation, they may want to work together with their landlord to try to get, the maximum benefit.
Okay. Donnie, you come off of mute.
Oh, I thought I did. Sorry. That was really my only question, what Tony had just asked, in regards to getting this resource to students as well, because we know they are affected as well. And other than that, I just wanted to say thank you for your time and for this presentation. It was quick, but it was in depth. So really appreciative of that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a lot of information, but I think what's really important for tenants to know is if you have COVID-related financial distress, right, and that's like Janine mentioned, because of expenses, because you lost your job, you can't pay the rent, then you should be submitting that declaration to your landlord so they know that you can't, and then trying to pay that 25% and know that there is this rental relief. And that, working with your landlord, if your landlord can apply to try to get up to the 80% is really important.
I also wanted to just share with folks that in the San Joaquin County, so we did share a few things. Faith in the Valley is, we have a regional lens, and so we shared the link for those in the chat that need to see this or share this information in Spanish. It is in the chat. All you need to do is just click the YouTube video in the chat, and you can share that. I'm encouraging you to share it via text message, share it via email, but to circulate it around. It's really, really important information, especially for our brothers and sisters that are undocumented and those that are migrant farm workers that don't necessarily have access to social media. Please send that information to them. The other thing that I wanted to share is just to extend an invitation. Zani, if you want to just share that information with folks.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So yeah, on April 14th at 6 p.m. will be the first the start of our biweekly Faith in the Valley Housing Task Force meetings. So we're encouraging you all to join us in that space and learn from us as we learn from you, and bring your testimonies, bring your stories, just bring you and all that you are to that space.
You don't
Yeah,
need to be, I'm sorry,
I
Janine,
just
you
want
don't
to
need to.
go.
Hold on one second, Janine. So the invitation that we're extending to you all in the community, Zani and I want to make sure that you do not need to be an expert in anything, because we're not. We're learning as we go, and we're learning and doing this together. All you need to be is someone who is deeply concerned about housing and the housing issues. All you need to be is someone who is behind in their rent or experiencing habitability issues, meaning you have some issues like Monica was sharing, bed bugs, infestation with roaches, you not running wild. You don't even know whether or not you have rights. Or you know that code enforcement should be contacted, but you're afraid to. This is going to be that space for you. So we are asking and inviting you to show up on Wednesday, April 14th at 6 p.m. We're going to be meeting twice a month. It is not going to be too taxing on you, but we want to start building relationships with community members, helping them to feel empowered and have and know that their voice matters and that they have rights. And what do we need to fix in order to get things functioning the way that they should? I'm sorry, Janine, go ahead.
Just wanted to say what you and Zani are lifting right now is this is about knowing what our rights are. And one right that we have is a right to organize. We have a right to form tenant unions. We have a right to work together. This is the way the world is right now, but we have a right to organize to create the world that we want to see, one where every single person is guaranteed safe, decent, and permanently affordable housing. So thanks, y'all.
The last thing that I wanted to lift up is that we are working on pushing and implementing what is called right to counsel. There's something that we're working on throughout the entire Central Valley. It is being implemented in other cities throughout the state of California, and it's been implemented in other cities and states throughout the United States of America. Right to counsel means that most of the property owners already have access to legal representation when you are being evicted. 9 times out of 10, you receive a notice. In the past, it was a 3-day pay or quit, 30-day get out. You got to go. 60-day notice. It's time to move, or you get locked out. But when you get that eviction notice, most times you don't even know what to do with it. In a lot of cases, folks just pack up and move. You panic, you're not sure. We do reach out to CRLA, we'll reach out to Fair Housing, but we don't always know what our rights are. And we can't afford, if you can't afford to pay your rent, how are you going to afford an attorney? And I'm gonna try not to get too much on a soapbox on that, but it's real. So if I can't afford to pay my rent, I've fallen behind on that. How am I going to afford an attorney? And so right to counsel says that you have a right to legal representation as a tenant when you are going into eviction court. And so we'll dig a little bit deeper into the throes of what right to counsel is, what it offers, what we're asking for on a later date, because we are going to be trying to have a monthly housing updates from Faith in the Valley when it comes to the housing work and what we're doing. But I just wanted to give you a glimpse into that. That is something Zani and I are working on. And we're working on that with the Housing Justice Coalition, with Reinvent South Stockton as well, in partnership with Visionary Home Builders and others. So we are really, really doing as much work as we can in order to make sure that your rights are adhered to when it comes to housing. So with that being said, is there anything else? I don't see any questions that are being dropped in the chat and Facebook. On my Faith in the Valley page is acting persnickety and snooty when it comes to rules and regulations. I'll have to argue with them about. Anything else we need to lift up? Are we good?
I think that's good. The only thing is I saw a comment, and I'm not sure where I saw it, just popped up, but regarding Stanislaus County.
Yes.
Stanislaus County also does have their own rental assistance program. So for residents who live in Stanislaus County, they should reach out to, and I think the information was popped up in one of the comments, the website, but they do have their own program as well.
Okay, I'm looking for that. So what we need to do is to make sure that we give access to that information. We have here, if you live in Kern, there is legal. Okay, if you live in Fresno, there is some information for Fresno.
Fresno also does have a housing retention program. That's the emergency rent assistance. And I'm going to drop the names of the community organizations that are helping to get that out.
And so what we will do, I'm not seeing it right off, Monica, but what we will do is we will double back and make sure that we put that information as well in the chat for Stanislaus. What is the name of it?
I think it's Stanislaus Rental Program. I don't know that it has another specific, but I would say it's I think the website was posted there as well. So I think if you click on that link, it should.
Okay.
I believe it's through their county.
I think one number that's just really helpful is the 211 number for United Way services. And you literally, y'all, it's like back in the day, 411. This is 211 for all kinds of programs and services related to housing, food, utilities, legal services. That's a great starting point. And every single county can call that 211, and you'll be directed to people in your county that can help get you connected with services.
So we will be coming back again in April. It will be what, the second week of April, or mid-April, I should say, before the 14th. And so we will we will send out a flyer and some information within the next 40 hours of our next housing update. We'll be inviting Monica and some others back. Probably bring some folks in from the southern side of the Central Valley as well. And then that one, we're going to be talking about some general housing rights that you have, some general housing information you should know that was popping up in questions on yesterday's conversation that was in Spanish. So you have our information. I'll drop it in the chat again. My information is Tony@faithinthevalley.org. If you need to get in touch with me. And then there is Zani. Like I said, it's being snooty and I don't know why. And there's Zani@faithinthevalley.org. And if there is nothing else, y'all, we're good. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Monica, for taking the time out to be a part of this conversation. I appreciate you always, always.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
All right. And so we're going to log out. You guys have a wonderful day. Don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything.